The signal came from the edge of known space, weak and desperate, repeating the same message over and over again. It was a cry for help from a dying world. The Volanti were a gentle species. They had hollow bones like birds and feathers that shimmered in colors that had no name in any human language. For 10,000 years, they had created art and music that made other species weep with joy. They built cities of crystal that caught the light of their twin suns and scattered rainbows across the land. They had never fought a war. They had never needed to. But now the Krix had come. The Krix Dominion was everything the Volanti were not. They were insects the size of bears, with armored shells and claws that could cut through metal. They did not create. They consumed. They moved from world to world, taking what they wanted and leaving nothing behind but bones and ash. The Volanti had nothing the Krix needed except their bodies, which could be processed into protein, paste to feed the endless hunger of the Dominion's larvae. The siege had begun 3 days ago. Krix warships filled the sky above Sci-Fi 4, blocking out the stars. Their bombs fell on the coastal cities first, shattering the beautiful crystal towers into dust. Millions of Volanti fled inland, but there was nowhere to run. The Krix landing craft were already descending, carrying soldiers who felt nothing, who knew nothing except the drive to harvest. Elder Sereth stood in the communication chamber of the last functioning broadcast station. She was old, her feathers faded to silver, her wings too weak to fly. But her voice was still strong as she spoke into the transmitter. "This is Sci-Fi 4 calling any who can hear. We are under attack. Our people are dying. We have no weapons, no soldiers, no way to fight. Please, if anyone is listening, we need help. We need someone to save us." The message traveled outward at the speed of light, crossing the vast emptiness between stars. It reached 100 different receivers on 100 different worlds. It was heard by species who had the power to help, who had fleets and armies and the strength to push back the Krix. None of them moved. The Galactic Concord was the great alliance of civilized species, a government that spanned 1,000 star systems. Its leaders gathered in their grand chamber to discuss the Volanti distress call. They talked for hours. They debated. They analyzed. They calculated the cost of intervention against the benefit of saving the Volanti. The numbers did not add up. "Sci-Fi 4 has no strategic value," said Counselor Veth, a tall being with gray skin and 4 arms. "The Volanti produce nothing we need. Their world contains no rare resources. If we send a fleet, we risk war with the Krix Dominion. The cost in ships and soldiers would be enormous." "But they are dying," said another counselor, a small creature covered in blue fur. "Does that not matter?" "Everything matters," Counselor Veth replied. "But we must be practical. We cannot save everyone. We must choose our battles wisely." The vote was taken. The motion to send aid was defeated by a margin of 3-1. The Concord would send a strongly worded message to the Krix Dominion expressing concern about their aggressive actions. Nothing more. The Volanti would die, and the galaxy would continue turning. But the distress signal had not only reached the Concord, it had also reached Earth. Humanity was new to the galactic stage. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel 200 years ago, and they had only made contact with other species 150 years after that. By the standards of the ancient civilizations of the Concord, they were children, barely out of their cradle. They were also terrifying. Earth was what the Concord classified as a Class 12 death world. This was the highest rating possible. It meant that the planet was so dangerous, so hostile to life, that the fact anything had evolved there at all was considered a statistical miracle. Earth had crushing gravity, a poisonous atmosphere filled with a corrosive gas called oxygen, and liquid water that covered most of its surface. It had earthquakes and volcanoes and hurricanes. It had predators in every environment, from the crushing depths of its oceans to the frozen peaks of its mountains. And somehow, humans had not only survived there, they had thrived. They had become the dominant species on the most dangerous planet in known space. The Concorde had studied humans carefully. What they found disturbed them deeply. Humans were persistent predators, which meant they did not chase their prey quickly like most hunters. Instead, they followed it slowly, for hours or even days, never stopping, never resting, until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. They had a chemical in their blood called adrenaline that gave them incredible strength and speed when they were in danger. They could survive wounds that would kill any other species. They could keep fighting long after they should have died. And perhaps most disturbing of all, they were pack hunters. They did not fight alone. They fought together, in groups, with a loyalty to each other that went beyond logic or reason. Admiral Elena Vasquez sat in her command chair aboard the carrier Defiance. She was 53 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and scars on her hands from battles she rarely talked about. She had been a soldier for 30 years, and she had seen things that would break most people. But she was still here. She was still fighting. The distress signal played on her screen. She watched the face of Elder Sereth, saw the fear in the old alien's eyes, heard the desperation in her voice. "What's the Concorde doing about this?" she asked her communications officer. "Nothing, Admiral." They voted against intervention. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the star chart, at the small dot that represented Seraphil 4, at the Krix fleet symbol surrounding it like a swarm of locusts. How long to reach them at maximum burn? 18 hours, Admiral. But we have no authorization from the Concorde. If we intervene, there could be diplomatic consequences. Vasquez smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a wolf who had just caught the scent of blood. "They asked for help," she said simply. "That's enough." She opened a channel to the fleet. 12 ships, 4,000 sailors and marines. Not many, against the might of the Krix Dominion. But they were human, and humans did not abandon people who called for help. "All ships, this is Admiral Vasquez. Set course for Seraphil 4. Maximum burn. We have people to save." The fleet turned as one and leaped into the darkness between stars. Somewhere in the Concorde chamber, a diplomatic AI registered the movement. It sent a query to the human embassy, asking which fleet was mobilizing, and why the response created confusion across 1,000 worlds. Earth has dispatched forces. Counselor Veth read the message 3 times, hoping he had misunderstood. Then he pulled up humanity's file and felt cold fear spread through his body. Who authorized the humans? He demanded. No one answered. No one had to. The sky above Seraphil 4 had turned the color of blood. Fires burned across the continent, sending columns of black smoke into the atmosphere. The crystal cities that had stood for thousands of years were crumbling, their beautiful towers shattered by Krix bombardment. In the streets below, Delanthi ran and screamed and died. Broodlord Sketh Arak watched the destruction from the command deck of his flagship with something close to satisfaction. He was large even for a Krix, his shell scarred from 100 battles, his compound eyes reflecting the flames below like 1,000 tiny mirrors. He had conquered 17 worlds in his career. This one would be the 18th. His tactical officer approached with the latest casualty reports. The Volanthi were dying in satisfying numbers. Soon there would be enough bodies to begin the harvesting process. The larvae back home were hungry, always hungry, and fresh protein was needed to feed the next generation of warriors. "Broodlord," the officer said, "our sensors detect incoming vessels. Unknown configuration." Sketharak turned his massive head. "To Concorde?" "No, Broodlord. The energy signatures do not match any Concorde vessel." They appear to be human. The word meant little to Sketharak. He had heard of humans, of course. Everyone in the galaxy had heard of them. They were the strange soft creatures from the Deathworld who had recently joined the galactic community. But he had never fought them. They were too new, too weak, too unimportant to matter. "How many ships?" he asked. 12, Broodlord. Sketharak made a sound that might have been laughter. His fleet numbered over 200 vessels, including 30 capital ships that could crack a planet's crust. 12 ships was not a threat. It was an insult. "Open a channel," he commanded. "I will accept their surrender." The view screen flickered to life, and Sketharak got his first look at a human. She was small, much smaller than him, with a soft body covered in fabric and a face that had only 2 eyes. She looked fragile, breakable, like the Volanthi, but without their beauty. He could crush her skull with one claw, but something about her expression made him pause. She was smiling, not the nervous smile of a creature facing death, but the confident smile of someone who knew something he did not. "I am Broodlord Sketharak of the Krix Dominion," he said. "You are trespassing in a war zone. Surrender your vessels and you will be harvested quickly." The human's smile widened. "Admiral Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Defense Fleet, you are committing acts of genocide against the civilian population. Withdraw your forces immediately, or we will destroy you." For a moment, Sketharak did not understand. Then he realized the human was serious. She actually believed she could threaten him. "With 12 ships, you are outgunned," he said flatly. "We know," Vasquez replied. "We brought enough." The channel closed. Sketharak stared at the blank screen for 3 full seconds. Then he gave the order to attack. The Krix fleet moved as one, turning to face the tiny human force. Weapons charged. Targeting systems locked. Victory would be quick and absolute. The Broodlord allowed himself to imagine the feast that would follow. The soft human flesh rendered down into paste for his offspring. Then the human ships did something impossible. Instead of retreating, instead of keeping their distance and trying to use long-range weapons like any sane species would do, they accelerated. They flew directly at the Krix fleet at speeds that should have been suicidal. Sketharak had never seen anything like it. Every species in the galaxy knew that ship-to-ship combat was fought at range. You stayed back, you traded fire, you looked for weakness. You did not charge directly into the teeth of a Theos superior force. The humans did not seem to know this. The first exchange of fire was devastating. Krix weapons tore into the human ships, punching through armor and shields, venting atmosphere into the void. But the humans did not stop. They kept coming, their own weapons firing continuously, and those weapons hit with a force that surprised the Krix gunners. Human ships, it turned out, were built differently than other vessels. They did not prioritize speed or elegance. They prioritized one thing above all else: the ability to take punishment and keep fighting. The destroyer Santiago took 3 direct hits to its port side. Entire sections of the ship were destroyed. Atmosphere vented from multiple decks. Any other vessel would have been crippled, forced to withdraw, or destroyed outright. The Santiago kept coming. It aimed itself at the nearest Krix carrier and increased speed. Sketharak watched in disbelief as the tiny ship, burning and broken, rammed directly into the carrier's hangar bay and detonated its reactor core. The explosion destroyed both ships. It killed every Krix aboard the carrier. And when rescue pods were recovered 6 hours later, Sketharak learned something that chilled his blood. The crew of the Santiago had not died. Not all of them. They had evacuated the damaged sections before the impact, sealing themselves in the remaining parts of the ship. They had ridden the explosion like a wave. And when rescue pods reached them, they were still fighting, still shooting at any Krix vessel that came close. The battle continued for 12 hours. By any rational measure, the humans should have lost. They were outnumbered almost 20 to 1. They lost 4 ships completely, and every other vessel was damaged. But something strange happened as the hours passed. The Krikks stopped advancing. It was not because they were losing ships, although they were. It was not because their weapons were failing, although human armor was proving harder to penetrate than expected. It was something else, something that Sketharak could see spreading through his fleet like a disease. Fear. The Krikks were predators. They had conquered world after world by being stronger, faster, more numerous than their prey. Every species they had faced had eventually broken. They ran. They surrendered. They begged for mercy. The humans did not break. No matter how much damage they took, no matter how many of their people died, they kept fighting. They did not run. They did not surrender. They did not beg. They just kept coming, kept shooting, kept closing the distance until they were so close that every shot hit and every death mattered. Sketharak watched a human cruiser drift past his viewport, its hull scorched and punctured, fires burning in its compartments. Through one of the breaches, he could see human soldiers in armored suits, still manning their weapons, still firing into the Krikk ships around them. One of them was missing an arm. He was using his remaining hand to reload his weapon. The Broodlord had hunted 1,000 species. He had seen courage and cowardice, strength and weakness in all their forms. But he had never seen anything like this. He had never faced prey that refused to acknowledge it was prey. By the 18th hour, the battle had reached a stalemate. The human fleet was too damaged to press its advantage. The Krikks' fleet was too frightened to push for victory. Both sides held position, licking their wounds, watching each other across the void. Admiral Vasquez appeared on screen one more time. She looked tired now, her uniform torn and stained with blood that might have been her own. But she was still smiling. "Still here," she said. "Still fighting. How about you?" Sketharak had no response. He had gone hunting, and he had found something that hunted back. Something that did not stop. Something that smiled even as it bled. For the first time in his long career, the Broodlord of the Krikks Dominion wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The naval battle had reached a standstill, but the war on the ground was far from over. Krikk soldiers had already landed on Sci-Fi 4 before the human fleet arrived. They held the major cities. They held the population centers. They held thousands of Volanthi hostages, using them as shields against any attack from orbit. Admiral Vasquez studied the tactical display in her damaged command center. The Defiance had taken heavy fire during the battle, and half her systems were operating on backup power. But she was not looking at her ship's problems. She was looking at the planet below. The Krikks have 40,000 ground troops across 3 continents, her intelligence officer reported. They're concentrated in the urban areas. Civilian casualties will be extreme if we use orbital bombardment. Then we don't use orbital bombardment, Vasquez replied. We go in. The 41st Orbital Drop Regiment had been waiting for this moment. They called themselves the Screaming Eagles, and they had earned that name in battles across a dozen worlds. They were the best soldiers humanity had to offer, trained to drop from orbit in armored pods, to survive impacts that would kill any other species, to fight in conditions that would be suicide for anyone else. Sergeant Major David Okonkwo led First Squad. He was a large man with skin the color of dark earth and eyes that had seen too many friends die. He had been fighting since he was 18 years old. He was 42 now, and every year showed in the scars on his body. But he was still here. He was still fighting. The drop pods launched from the Defiance like seeds falling from a dying tree. 200 soldiers in 200 metal coffins, plummeting toward the planet below at speeds that would turn most creatures to jelly. The Crick's anti-aircraft guns opened fire immediately, filling the sky with energy beams and explosive shells. 14 pods were hit on the way down. The soldiers inside died instantly, vaporized by the explosions. But the rest kept falling, their heat shields glowing red, their occupants praying to whatever gods they believed in. Okonkwo's pod slammed into the ground like a meteor. The impact threw him against his restraints so hard that he heard his ribs crack. Pain flooded through him, the kind of pain that would have left any other species unconscious or dead. He took a breath, felt the broken bones grinding together, and hit the release button. The pod opened. He stepped out onto an alien world, under an alien sky, with broken bones and a rifle in his hands. Around him, other pods were opening. Other soldiers were emerging. Some of them were wounded. All of them were ready to fight. The Crick's ground commander could not understand what he was seeing. He watched from his command post as the human soldiers crawled out of their crash pods and immediately began advancing. Some of them were limping. Some of them were bleeding. One of them had a piece of metal sticking out of his leg. None of them stopped. The first engagement happened in what had been a Volanthi market district. Crystal stalls and delicate artwork lay shattered across the ground, mixed with the bodies of civilians who had not escaped in time. The Cricks had set up defensive positions in the ruins, using Volanthi prisoners as shields. Standard Concord military doctrine was clear in situations like this. When hostages were involved, you negotiated. You pulled back. You called for specialized teams. You did not, under any circumstances, charge directly into the enemy position. The humans had not read the Concord military doctrine. Okonkwo moved through the ruins like a ghost. His broken ribs screamed with every breath, but he ignored them. Pain was just information. It told him he was still alive. He had learned to use it, to let it sharpen his focus instead of dulling it. His squad moved with him, covering each other, advancing in short bursts from cover to cover. They did not speak. They did not need to. After years of training and fighting together, they knew each other's movements better than they knew their own. The Cricks had positioned themselves well. They had clear lines of fire. They had superior numbers. They had hostages in front of them, fragile Volanthi who would die the moment shooting started. By any tactical analysis, the humans should have been unable to attack. But tactical analysis did not account for what humans were willing to do. Private Maria Chun was 24 years old. She had grown up on a farm on a colony world, joined the military to pay for her education, and discovered that she was very good at violence. She was also very fast. When the assault began, she was the first one through the Crick's line. A Crick soldier swung a blade at her. She ducked under it and shot him 3 times in the thorax. Another soldier grabbed her arm, trying to pull her down. His claw cut through her armor and into her flesh, severing muscle and tendon, leaving her left arm hanging useless at her side. Chun did not scream. She did not fall. She pulled her sidearm with her right hand and killed the soldier who had wounded her. Then she killed 2 more. Then she collapsed against the wall, her blood pooling on the ground, and kept firing until her magazine was empty. When the medics reached her, she was still conscious. She had tied off her own arm with her belt to stop the bleeding. She was asking for more ammunition. The battle for the market district lasted 4 hours. When it was over, the Cricks were dead or retreating. The hostages were alive. 37 humans had been wounded. 12 had been killed. Okonkwo sat among the ruins, letting a medic stitch the gash across his ribs without anesthetic. He had refused it. Others needed it more. Around him, Volanthi survivors were emerging from hiding, their large eyes wide with confusion and fear, and something else. Hope. An elderly Volanthi approached him. She was small, even by her species standards, her feathers silver with age. She trembled as she walked. but she walked. She came to stand before Okonkwo and looked up at him with eyes that had seen her world burn. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was soft, musical, even through the translation device. "Why did you come? We are strangers to you. We have nothing to offer you. We are weak, and you are strong. Why do you risk your lives for us?" Okonkwo was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the dead around him, human and Crix alike. He looked at the wounded, being carried to aid stations. He looked at the Volanthi civilians, huddled together, waiting to see if they would live or die. "Because you asked," he said finally, "and because someone should." The old Volanthi did not seem to understand. How could she? Their species had never known war. They had never learned that some people would fight not for profit or power, but simply because it was the right thing to do. But she saw the truth in the human's eyes. She saw that he meant what he said. And for the first time since the Crix ships had appeared in her sky, she felt something other than fear. She bowed to him, a gesture of deep respect among her people, and spoke a blessing in her own language. Okonkwo did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. "Thank you." He nodded to her, then pushed himself to his feet. His ribs burned. His body ached. But there were more Crix to fight, more civilians to save. The war was not over. But for the first time, the Volanthi believed they might survive it. And somewhere above them, watching through the sensors of her damaged ship, Admiral Vasquez smiled. Her people were on the ground. Her people were fighting. And they would not stop until every last Volanthi was safe. That was what humans did. That was who they were. They were the ones who came when no one else would. Broodlord Sketharak had sent a message to the nearest Crix fleet, requesting reinforcements. The reply had been disappointing. The fleet was 3 weeks away. He would have to handle the humans with the forces he had. This should not have been a problem. He still outnumbered them significantly. His ships still controlled the space around Serafil IV. His ground forces still held most of the major cities. By any reasonable calculation, victory was still within reach. But the reasonable calculations kept being wrong. On the 5th day of the ground war, Sketharak received a report that troubled him deeply. His field commanders were reporting something strange about the humans. Something unexpected. They were learning. The tactics that had worked on the first day of fighting no longer worked on the 3rd. Ambushes that had caught human squads by surprise were now being anticipated and countered. Defensive positions that had held for hours were being flanked and destroyed. The humans were studying the Crix, analyzing their patterns, adapting their strategies in real time, and they were remembering Commander. Rixdal had been one of the most effective Crix officers on the ground. He had killed dozens of Volanthi and several humans in the early days of the invasion. He had developed a technique that seemed to work well against the Deathworlders. He would take Volanthi prisoners and execute them in view of human positions, one by one, until the humans broke cover in rage and exposed themselves to his snipers. It had worked twice. On the 3rd attempt, the humans did not break cover. They watched. They marked his position. They noted his movements. For 4 days, nothing happened. Rixdal began to relax. Perhaps the humans had given up. Perhaps they had accepted that some deaths could not be avenged. On the 5th day, he was walking between buildings during a supply transfer. He felt safe. He was surrounded by guards. The nearest human position was over 2 kilometers away, far beyond the range of any infantry weapon. The shot came from a gap in the ruins, a space no wider than a Crix hand. It traveled 2,300 meters through open air, adjusted for wind and gravity and the rotation of the planet. It struck Rixdal directly through his primary eye and exited through the back of his skull. He was dead before he hit the ground. The humans had a word for what they had done. They called it payback. The news spread through the Krik's occupation forces like a disease. The humans did not forget. The humans did not forgive. If you hurt them, if you hurt the people they were protecting, they would find you. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, certainly, absolutely, they would find you, and they would kill you. Morale began to collapse. Krik soldiers who had never known fear started jumping at shadows. Reports came in of human squads that seemed to appear from nowhere, striking hard and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. Rumors spread of humans who could not be killed, who kept fighting even with wounds that would be fatal to any normal creature. These rumors were exaggerated, but only slightly. Private Chun had lost her arm in the first days of fighting. The medics had saved her life, but she would never use that arm again. Standard military protocol would have sent her back to the fleet for recovery and eventual discharge. Chun refused to go. She had learned to shoot with her right hand. She had modified her armor to compensate for her missing limb. She had returned to the front lines within a week, leading a fire team that had become famous among both humans and Valanthi. The Kriks had started calling her the half-dead one. They said she had already died once and come back to haunt them. It was not true, of course, but the fear it created was very real. Something else was happening too. Something that Sketharak had not anticipated. The Valanthi were changing in the early days. They had been passive victims, hiding and hoping, waiting to be saved or slaughtered. But as they watched the humans fight, as they saw soldiers give their lives to protect strangers, something awakened in them. They began to help. It started with small things. A Valanthi would bring water to a human position. Another would tend the wounded, using their delicate hands to apply bandages and hold pressure on bleeding wounds. They learned human names and taught their own. They shared what little food they had. Then it became more. Valanthi scouts began moving through their own cities, using their knowledge of the crystal tunnels and hidden passages to map Krik's positions. They reported troop movements to human commanders. They helped refugees escape from occupied zones. They became part of the war effort, not as soldiers, but as something equally important. They became hope. A young Valanthi girl found Sergeant Major Okonkwo resting in the ruins of what had been a temple. He was exhausted, running on almost no sleep, his body held together by painkillers and willpower. But he smiled when he saw her approaching. She was small, barely reaching his waist, with feathers that shifted from blue to gold as she moved. In her hands, she held something precious, a crystal pendant, carved in the shape of a sunrise. "For you," she said, her voice soft and careful. "It is a gift of gratitude. Among my people, it is the highest honor we can give." Okonkwo accepted the pendant with both hands, cradling it gently, as if it were the most valuable thing in the world. To him, it was. "Thank you," he said. "I will keep it forever." The girl smiled, an expression that seemed strange on her avian features, but somehow right. Then she ran off to join the other refugees, leaving Okonkwo holding her gift. He looked at the pendant for a long moment. Then he tucked it inside his armor, close to his heart, and went back to war. By the end of the second week, the Krik's occupation was falling apart. Not because of any single battle, but because of 1,000 small defeats. Every patrol that went out came back smaller. Every position that was held was eventually lost. The humans just kept coming, kept pushing, kept refusing to accept that they could not win. Broodlord Sketharak looked at the tactical display and saw the truth. He was losing. Not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily. His forces were being ground down by an enemy that would not stop, could not be broken, refused to behave like prey was supposed to behave. He had never faced anything like this. He had never even imagined anything like this. The Kriks were predators. They had always been predators. They took what they wanted because they were strong enough to take it. The weak existed to feed the strong. That was the natural order of things. But the humans did not follow the natural order. They protected the weak. They fought for creatures who could not fight for themselves. They sacrificed their own lives for strangers that it made no sense. It was inefficient. It was illogical, and it was working. Skethorek made a decision. He would not wait for reinforcements. He would not continue this grinding battle of attrition. He would pull his forces back, consolidate his position, and hold what he had until the other fleet arrived. It was the first time in his long career that he had ever retreated. But as he gave the orders, as his troops began pulling back from their forward positions, he could not shake the feeling that it would not matter. The humans would keep coming. They would keep fighting. They would not stop until every last Crix was dead or driven from this world. He had come to Sci-Fi 4 as a conqueror. Now he wondered if he would leave it all. The Crix fleet began its withdrawal on the 18th day. It was not a tactical retreat. It was not a strategic repositioning. It was a rout. Ships that had come to conquer were now fleeing, their holds empty of the harvest they had expected, their crews broken in spirit if not in body. Broodlord Skethorek stood on the command deck of his flagship and watched his empire's power retreat from a world that should have been easy prey. He had lost 37 ships in the orbital battle. He had lost over 15,000 ground troops. He had lost something else too, something that could not be measured in numbers. He had lost his belief that the Crix could not be defeated. Before he left the system, he recorded a message for Crix Command. It was the last communication anyone would receive from him for a very long time. "Do not engage the humans," he said, his voice flat and empty of its usual confidence. "They are not prey. They are not even predators. They are something else. Something that fights for reasons we cannot calculate. Avoid their attention. Let them have this world." The message was intercepted by human intelligence. It was translated and distributed throughout the fleet. Soldiers read it and laughed, the dark laughter of people who had survived something terrible. Officers read it and nodded grimly. Admiral Vasquez read it and said nothing at all. She understood what Sketh-Arak meant. The Crix saw war as hunting, as taking what you wanted from those too weak to stop you. They could not understand why anyone would fight for strangers, would die for people they had never met, would keep coming no matter the cost. That confusion was humanity's greatest weapon. The Galactic Concord convened an emergency session 3 days after the Crix withdrawal. The great chamber was filled with representatives from 100 species, all of them talking over each other, all of them trying to understand what had happened at Sci-Fi 4. Several species demanded sanctions against Earth for unauthorized military intervention. Others argued for commendation. Some wanted to pretend the whole thing had never happened. The debate went on for hours. Voices rising and falling, alliances shifting, votes being counted and recounted. Then Admiral Vasquez appeared on the main view screen, and everything stopped. She was still aboard the Defiance, which had limped into orbit around Sci-Fi 4 after the battle. The ship was barely functional, held together by emergency repairs and the stubbornness of its crew. Vasquez herself looked exhausted, her uniform torn and stained, dark circles under her eyes from days without sleep. But she stood straight. She spoke clearly, and every being in the chamber listened. "I understand you're debating what to do about our intervention," she said. "Some of you think we violated Concord law by acting without authorization. You're probably right. If you want to prosecute me personally, I'll accept the charges. I won't apologize, and I won't resist." She paused, letting the words sink in. "But before you make your decision, you should understand something about humans, about why we did what we did." She looked directly into the camera, directly into the eyes of every being watching. We remember what it was like to have no one coming, to cry for help into the dark and hear nothing. Our history is full of plagues and famines and wars where millions died because help arrived too late or not at all. We have seen our own people suffer and die while others watched and did nothing. Our voice grew stronger, harder. That history is written in our bones. We cannot forget it. We cannot ignore it. When someone calls for help, we answer. Not because it is profitable, not because it is strategic, not because it serves our interests. She leaned forward. Because it is right. Because we remember what it means to be alone. Because we made a promise to ourselves a long time ago that we would be the ones who come. Always. No matter what. She straightened again. So if the galaxy has a problem with that, the galaxy can take it up with our fleet. We'll be here. We'll always be here. And we will never, ever stop coming for those who need us. The transmission ended. For a long moment, no one in the chamber spoke. Then, slowly, the Volanthi representative rose from her seat. She was Elder Sareth, the same one who had sent the original distress call. She had traveled to the Concord to witness the debate, to plead for her people if necessary. Now she spoke with a voice that carried across the chamber. My world was dying, she said. My people were being slaughtered like animals. We called for help, and the Concord debated. We begged for mercy, and the Concord calculated. She turned to face the human ambassador. But the humans came. They did not ask what we could offer them. They did not count the cost. They saw that we were suffering, and they came to help. They bled for us. They died for us. They saved us. She bowed, the deepest gesture of respect her culture knew. Whatever this council decides, the Volanthi will never forget. We will never stop being grateful. And we will stand with humanity forever. The vote that followed was not even close. The motion to sanction Earth was defeated overwhelmingly. In its place, a new motion was passed, a formal commendation for the human intervention at Seraphel 4. But that was just politics. What happened next was more important. In the days and weeks that followed, 17 species quietly petitioned for defensive treaties with Earth. They were the small species, the weak species, the ones who had always lived in fear of predators like the Cricks. They had seen what humans would do for strangers, and they wanted that protection for themselves. The Volanthi formally requested permanent human embassy status. They began composing an epic poem in humanity's honor, a work they intended to spend generations perfecting. Every Volanthi child would learn the story of the humans who came when no one else would. And somewhere in the dark between stars, the story spread. Ship to ship, world to world, species to species. The story of Seraphel 4. The story of the Deathworlders who fought not for conquest or profit, but for something stranger. Something many species had never encountered. Compassion. Sergeant Major Okonkwo returned to Earth 6 months later. He had been offered a medal, a promotion, a hero's welcome. He turned down most of it. He just wanted to go home, to rest, to remember the friends he had lost. But he kept the crystal pendant. He wore it every day, a small weight against his chest, a reminder of a little girl who had given him the greatest gift her people knew. He had fought in many wars. He had killed many enemies. But when he thought about Seraphel 4, he did not think about the fighting. He thought about the moment when the old Volanthi elder had asked him why they had come. Because you asked. And because someone should. That was what being human meant. That was the legacy they would leave behind. In a galaxy vast and often cruel, there was now a species that would answer when others called. A species that would fight for those who could not fight for themselves. A species that would never, ever abandon anyone who needed help. The galaxy had many names for them. Deathworlders, persistence predators, the ones who do not stop. But the Volanthi had the truest name of all. They called them Hope. And somewhere, on a ship sailing through the endless dark. Admiral Elena Vasquez looked out at the stars and smiled. There would be other battles, other worlds in need, other calls for help echoing through the void, and humanity would answer them. Always, no matter what, because that was who they were. That was who they had always been. They were the ones who came,